Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Journey Builder Deep Dive series. So as you are already aware, we have these deep dive series happening on Tuesday and Thursday, 8 a.m. And we also have the deep dive series happening on Wednesday, same time. Make sure that you register to all the sessions. We have 15 sessions lined up in the deep dive series. I'll be sharing the link shortly. Make sure that you register to all the sessions that you want to attend. And today's session is all about MC Connect and using Salesforce data within the journeys. And we have our wonderful Matthews, and everybody in the Marketing Cloud ecosystem knows Matthews. And he is one of my favorite persons. So I'm glad to have Matthews today with us and then share his insights. I will turn it over to you, Matthews.
Thank you very much for the welcome, Jashna. Happy to see you. As Jashna mentioned, today we'll be talking about how you can use the Salesforce CRM data in the Journey Builder using the Marketing Cloud Connect. This Marketing Cloud Connect part is important because I won't be talking about the distributed marketing today, just the all things Marketing Cloud Connect. As for the organization, there will be a Q&A session part at the end of the call, but if you have like some short questions during the webinar related to a specific slide, I will try to answer them if I'm able to see them on the chat. Going forward with it, I am Mateusz Dąbrowski. I am architect at PwC, Salesforce MVP, marketing champion, and author of the mateuszdombrowski.pl blog. And today we'll be talking again about Salesforce data and Marketing Cloud Journey Builder. So what you can do with Salesforce CRM data in the Journey Builder. Of course, you have the Salesforce data entry. So one of the entry types that allows you to leverage the information that you have in your Salesforce CRM to inject the people into your campaign. And you have the Salesforce community welcome, Salesforce campaign injection, and the Salesforce data. Fun thing about these three entry sources is that no one is using the community welcome, no one is using the Salesforce campaign, everyone is using the Salesforce data because it's most stable and covers all the functions that you need, so you actually don't have to worry about the other two. Salesforce data can do everything you want in terms of this Salesforce data entry. Another thing that is also related to using Salesforce CRM with Journey Builder is the Salesforce activities, which is actually a way to use the data the other way around. So to push information from your journey back to Salesforce CRM and to update in real time the information there. And here, there is also quite a simplified approach to it. Object activity can do everything that all other activities can do. So actually, you can use only object activity if you want. It can do everything. It was a great session. Thank you. That's all on Salesforce CRM data in Marketing Cloud. Yeah, of course, it's not, but the rest is actually just the deep dive into those two sections because those two elements are actually the core of how you can use the Salesforce data in your Marketing Cloud. So let's make a deep dive as the title of this session and this whole group of sessions actually is. So first thing is the Salesforce data entry details and the one-on-one. So what we can say about it, the great thing about it is that it's real time. And it means that whenever something happens in the CRM in moments, you can push this information to Journey Builder and create a marketing path for this person. Another thing is that it can access all the objects, not just those objects that you configured within your Marketing Cloud Connect. It's not limited to those. You can actually get access to every standard and custom object that you have in your Salesforce CRM, be it Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, or else. Another thing, it can inject contacts, leads, users, and person accounts. But with person accounts, it's a bit more complicated because person accounts is this amalgamation of account and contact. I will be mentioning this once more a bit later on, but you want to push the contact part of the person account to the Journey Builder. Another thing is that with Salesforce data entry, you can inject Salesforce data into the Journey Builder, either on the create of the record within the object or on the update. For the create, it's simple. Whenever, for example, there is a new contact created, you can insert them into the Marketing Cloud Journey Builder. For update, you will have to set the rules, like the filters. Okay, when the update happens, but what type of update it is. This is for the fact that you don't want every single update to trigger entry to the Journey Builder. You rather want to select some specific things like update that changes the status or update that adds a specific data that was missing earlier to the, for example, contact for them to inject into the journey. Interesting part is that you can also apply those filters to creation. So you can also say that, okay, I don't want to trigger the journey for every single created record, only for the records with a specific conditions. Another thing is that when we are talking about these triggers on creator update, there is one very, very important thing that is quite a big gotcha that trips a lot of people. It's that when you are thinking about the update part, the update needs to happen from the situation where the record doesn't meet the criteria to the situation where the record meets criteria. Only then the trigger will happen. So for example, you can have a filter on the update that you want to inject the updated record to Journey Builder only then when the status changes to close to 1, for example, for a specific record. If the status was different before, it is updated to close 1, it will be triggering. If the record doesn't meet criteria after the update, of course, it will not be triggered. If the record met the criteria before, but doesn't meet criteria after, it will be, of course, no trigger. But the thing that is tripping a lot of people is that if the record met criteria before and after the update, it still meets criteria, there will also be no trigger. And this is especially important if you have, for example, multiple different filter criteria that can be fulfilled in multiple ways. So then you need to think that, okay, this record will jump into the journey only once. First time all the criteria are fulfilled. There is yet another level of gotcha here, because if you have a record that meets criteria and there is an update that makes the record don't meet criteria, if then there is yet another update that again record meets criteria, this will again allow this person to trigger into the journey because it goes back to this first scenario that you can see on the top. So generally, when you are building the filter criteria for entry to the journey, always think about this fact that you need to have a situation when the record is being updated from not fulfilling criteria to filling criteria, and only then the trigger to journey will happen. Another things that are important is that filters can happen only within one level of relationship. And by one level of relationship, what I mean is that, for example, when we are talking about, I don't know, let's think about case. If we want to have a filter that is based, sorry, not case, for contact, if we want to have a filter that is based on the contact point type consent, it will not be possible because we have the contact, then there is relationship to individual, and from individual, there is relationship to contact point type consent. So if you select contact as your entry object for the Salesforce entry, you will be able to build your filters based on the individual, which is one relationship away, but you won't be able to select any data, any filters built on the contact point type consent that is 2 relationships away. So it's actually crucial to select the right starting point, the starting object that has the data that you need, or has the data within one relationship of itself, because otherwise you won't be able to configure it within the Salesforce data entry. Finally, the customizable journey data. So the data that you are pushing along with the trigger also has the same limit within one relationship. So again, even if we are talking about the fields that we are moving from the CRM to the journey so that they can be used for the decision splits, for the personalization, and other things that you can want to leverage them within the journey builder. You also need to think about this starting object and the relationships to it. One last note here is that it is also very important that the trigger for the Salesforce data entry happens after update, which means that, for example, in some cases, it can create issues. One such scenario is that when you, for example, have a service appointment that has a specific scheduled start time within this object, if you want to trigger the journey based on the service appointment being canceled, you will be able to pull canceled service appointments into the journey and take the contact related to the service appointment to Journey Builder, but you won't be able to access the scheduled start time because it is being cleaned up, removed out of the box by Salesforce CRM when the status is changing to canceled, which means that you won't be able, or rather this value will be null after update when the trigger is being made to Journey Builder. So it's also always important that you need to check whether the data that you want to leverage for the entry data from the Salesforce data entry will be available also after the update happens, the one that you are looking for. And with that, here's this notion of this one relationship. So there's another example. If you are starting from contact, you will have access to the account, but you won't have access to the opportunity, which is 2 relationships away. But you can select opportunity as a starting object, and then you will have access to the account, which also has the contact ID. So you will be able to pull the contact ID for the specific opportunity. For example, again, depending, of course, on the architecture of your Salesforce CRM and what data you have, what type of accounts you are using. Going deeper with the Salesforce data entry, there are a few pros and cons of this injection method. The pros are, again, real time. I was already mentioning it before, but it's absolutely crucial because when we are considering it against the synchronized data extensions, using Automation Studio to calculate the data, output into a data extension, and use the data extension entry, it will take you like at least 15 minutes, probably much more, like 1 hour, 15 minutes in the worst case scenario. So having it real time is one of the huge pros of the Salesforce data entry. Another thing is that it is drag and drop UI. You don't need to know SQL. You don't need to know any programmatic languages. You can just use the drag and drop interface to configure your segment, your trigger, and make the connection between the CRM and your journey builder. Another part is that there is no impact on the automation execution limits. Again, starting this year, Salesforce started looking much stronger on the license limits and started actually enforcing them for the customers. So using Automation Studio for every single segment can quickly get you way over the license limit of your instance. Using Salesforce data entry is not limited in license, so you can actually build a lot of segments this way and lower the strain on the limit in terms of the segmentation. Then the Salesforce data entry can be reusable, which can make it much easier for you and your customers to work with it because you won't have to create it each time. Of course, you can do it. You can go to the Journey Builder, select the Salesforce data, and configure the Salesforce data entry from the journey. In this case, it will be just single use for this specific journey. But you can also go to the Journey Builder events and resources. And in the end resources, you will be also able to create Salesforce data entry event. And when you create it there, it will be reusable. And this is a very interesting solution if you have recurring sends, recurring journeys that are targeted into the same segment. So easy example, I would say, is that if you want to trigger a newsletter for a specific group in the CRM, you can do it by creating this newsletter for example, new joiners within a specific time frame, using reusable event. Just leverage it for every month newsletter for new joiners from this specific month. However, there are also some cons to Salesforce data entry. And one is that you need to know data model of the Salesforce CRM. You need to know what are the relationships. You need to know what are the fields, the difference in the field types, the difference between the labels or names and the API names within the fields, because this will help you a lot with correctly configuring the Salesforce data entry. Another thing is that this limited entry data scope. So this thing that you need to know which object you need to start with, and you have only this one relationship of the data that you can pull, is quite limiting, because sometimes you might want to pull data from multiple objects, especially if your CRM data model is quite complicated and has multiple master detail relationships, for example. You might not be able to get all the data you need unless the Salesforce CRM builds some custom fields that are capturing the essential data on the higher level up objects closer to what you need in your journey. Then another thing is that the Salesforce data entry and actually all things related to the Salesforce data in Marketing Cloud are fragile against Marketing Cloud issues. If there is a problem with the Marketing Cloud Connect, you will have a lot of problem if you are using multiple journey with the Salesforce data entry. Good thing is that in one of the previous releases, Salesforce added this beautiful cloud icon next to the journey name. So now you know which exact journeys are using the Salesforce data entry. So it makes it much easier to track where you are leveraging it. But I would say that Salesforce address will create you a lot of fun when you are building it on the test environment or the UAT environment, because each reconnection of Salesforce CRM org to your Marketing Cloud will create issues with it. And then you will have to be sure that your Marketing Cloud Connect configuration, your Marketing Cloud Connect users are stable, not changing, so that the data is not breaking, because there will be a lot of rework for you to do if there is an issue with the Marketing Cloud Connect. Okay, there are also a few gotchas related to Salesforce data entry. And there are some things that you just need to know to be able to correctly build journeys with this entry type. So first thing is that when you are selecting the fields that you want to inject into the journey, of course, you should pick only those that you need and not go overboard. But what is even more important is that you cannot go through the 60,000 characters limit, because it is the payload limit. So if you go over it, your API calls, your triggers will fail completely. And while it is really big limit, if you would like to push some more free text fields, big area fields from the Salesforce CRM, for example, for personalization purposes, you can go above this limit. So you need to think about whether you truly need this data. And even if yes, maybe consider some other solution to bring it. For example, using the AMP script function that I will be covering a bit later on. Another thing is that whenever you are selecting the datetime values to be entered into the journey builder, they will be converted into the UTC time zone. So you will need to think about how to transform this time into the time that you need in your personalizations within the emails or SMS, or how to leverage it in the decision splits when you're making some calculations on the dates. And B, the important part is that it is different time zone that the time zone that happens when you are using synchronized data extensions entry, or the data for the data extension entry. So you won't be able to reuse the same AMP script time zone conversion feature for the Salesforce data entry and data extension entry data coming from the CRM. So you will have to double, triple check the time zone in your emails. Another weird gotcha is that if the record does not yet exist in the mobile connect, you will need to push the phone number with the country code and the plus sign for it to be triggered in case of the Salesforce data entry. And this is, of course, interesting because this is not the format that you want for normal sense of SMS from the data extension, but there is actually a solution that is calculating the correct locale based on this convention. So be sure to use the correct format for the mobile connect. Finally, from the big gotchas, if your record is email opted out, the field in the CRM contact or lead email opt-out is checked, or the email files the list detective, so it's null or it's info at prefix or any other of the list detective rules, it won't enter the journey. And it means that it won't enter the journey even if you are not using the email activity within the journey. Because what is a difference in Salesforce data entry is that it is adding the records to all subscribers list at the moment they are injected into the journey, versus doing it at the moment the email activity is being triggered, which is the case for all other types of journeys or all other entry types. So it's really it's really important to think about what those two fields will be for your records, for your contacts lists, when you want to inject them into the journey, especially if you want, for example, more SMS-driven journey or some other type of journey that doesn't necessarily require the email channel. Okay, recommendations. One is that, or I already mentioned, you can use personal accounts, but always use the personal contact ID rather than the account ID for the who, because Marketing Cloud Connect is using the contacts, leads, and users as the contact IDs, and those are the records that are being created in the all contacts list. If you use the account ID for the person accounts, you will get duplicates because the same person will be created as a account or with the account ID as a subscriber key from the Salesforce data entry, and also be created as a contact ID subscriber key from synchronized data extensions. So you don't want it to have this disjointment because there will be a lot of issues down the line. Another thing is that always create very detailed documentation of your entry configuration, best to make it with the screenshots of all the steps, because what I mentioned earlier, if there is any issue with the Marketing Cloud Connect, you will have to rebuild it. So it's always better to have really, really deep documentation on the configuration to make it much easier for you to rebuild it should there be any issue. Another thing is that generally testing Salesforce data entry is hard because it's based on the triggers of events happening in the Salesforce CRM. Whenever you are building test journeys, where you're just trying to do some things with your test records, be sure to use the Salesforce data entry filters to make sure that only the record that you really, really want to receive the communication, test communication, are getting. One approach is, of course, using the domain on the email. You can just use for example, the list of the IDs if it's small test team. So this is really, really important. I see one question from Ankita. So yes, the records that are email opt-out checked, unless you filter them out within the Marketing Cloud Connect configuration, will be synchronized to the synchronized data extensions, but they won't enter the journey using the Salesforce data entry. So this distinction is important. Going back to the recommendations, always test. It's not easy because you cannot just do it with the test data from the data extension. You need to actually do it from the Salesforce CRM, create test records there, make sure only test records are going through, but always test because there is a lot of gotchas with the Salesforce data entry, especially as we'll be covering the journey data in a second. And finally, always triple check whether all the configuration is working still fine whenever you do the Salesforce or refresh or reconnection, because there is a lot of potential issues happening around this, because again, this is fragile around the Marketing Cloud Connect stuff. Okay, so we talked about Salesforce data entry. I will now go into the topic of the Salesforce data bindings. Just a small information. I'll be focusing on the Salesforce data entry data bindings. There will be completely separate session by Rafał Wolsztyniak down the line, covering a lot of more details about the data bindings and the contact data model for the Journey Builder. So be sure to check it as well. But there are a few things that are really interesting in terms of the Salesforce data entry. So first is the why. You want to use and learn the Salesforce data bindings because the standard personalization strings won't work for the Salesforce data entry journey data. When you are creating Salesforce data entry, it is in the backend creating a data extension that automatically has special naming convention of the object field name. Like, for example, you can see the contact individual salutation that is not working normally with some features of the Journey Builder. So data binding strings let you use the Salesforce data entry for both personalization and decisioning, as well as a few other things that we'll be also talking about, and how you can do it. So, or what you need to do. So the data bindings are those special strings that allow you to leverage this specific information coming from the Salesforce data entry. And you can do it by adding the object activity in your journey, going to map field step, selecting the field with the text data type for the mapping, and selecting the field from the journey data to see the data binding string on the left side. This sounds complex, so let's see it in the system. Here you can see that I created the object activity. I went to the map fields step, and here from the journey data on the right side, I selected the contact individual salutation, which automatically created this personalization string on the left side. And here we can see that it is using the event, the Salesforce data entry event. It has the special ID of this specific event, and then it selects a specific information about the field. So this is how you can get the data from the Salesforce data entry. And again, here you can see that there is this specific Salesforce ID or their object ID for the event. And this is important because you will want to use
Can't hear you at all. Try turning off the video. Hear you still?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, all good now.
Okay, when I was lost with sound?
I think it's just 1 minute ago. We didn't miss too much.
Okay, yeah, so just to make sure that the important part is shared through the webinar. Whenever you are building this personalization string that you want to leverage in the emails, it is creating this, or they're leveraging the event ID that you can see in the middle of the string here. When you are changing the Salesforce data entry within your journey or creating a new journey with new Salesforce data entry, this special string will change. So you will also need to update your personalization strings within the emails, for example, to leverage this new ID, because otherwise it won't work. Going forward, let's check what are the other Salesforce data sources that you can leverage in the Journey Builder. And one is, of course, the classic synchronized data extensions in Journey Builder. And with this, First, we can copy selected objects with selected fields from the CRM. So during the configuration, you are picking which objects, which fields you want to synchronize, how fast you want to do it. How fast is up to 15 minutes. So you have at least 15 minutes lag here. This data can be used for the decision splits. It can be used for goals or exit criteria. It can be used also to create segments with the data extension entry using the Automation Studio. And here is this yet another gotcha, that values coming this way are converted to the CST time zone, rather the UTC time zone. So that's why, again, depending on how you are getting your Salesforce data to the Marketing Cloud, you might need to have a bit different approach in terms of how you are updating the time zones in your personalization to the correct time zone for your customers. Okay, so when you should use the synchronous data extensions. The pros is that you can go through multiple levels of relationships. Especially with SQL, you can just do like whatever you want with the data that you have, as long as there is any foreign key that you can leverage for your queries. There are also flexible relationships and data transformation available with the query activities, because with the Salesforce data entry, you get the data as is in the CRM. With this, you can use SQL in the Automation Studio to change, update, group the data to create alternative information that will be easier for your journey plans. There are also cons. You can't use synchronized data extensions directly within the Journey Builder. You need to use them through the Automation Studio custom data extension and then as an entry, which means that the speed to journey will be slower because it's up to 15 minutes on the synchronized data extension, now it's up to 15 minutes on the Automation Studio, but it's also that it will eat up your license limits if you use Automation Studio every 15 minutes for building segments. Another thing is that when you are synchronizing data extensions, they are automatically creating their own relationships within the data designer, which is used for Journey Builder. And you can't really control those relationships. There is a specific order of those relationships. So the system-defined standard object relationships, followed by standard reference ID fields in alphabetical order, followed by custom reference ID fields in alphabetical order. But honestly, based on some checks, even if you configure the synchronized data extensions in the same order after the reconnection, you can get slightly different order of relationships. And because those are only one relationships between the objects, you can sometimes get broken relationships in terms of that. For example, you are going from contact to user and from user to case, which of course won't allow you to connect the contact to the user using the data designer, which doesn't matter for the SQL queries, but does matter if you want to use it for the decision splits or goal exit criteria. It is also fragile against the Marketing Cloud Connect issues, but not that much, because you can use Automation Studio to create a copy of the synchronous data extensions. And then even if there is an issue with the Marketing Cloud Connect, you are able to use the information that is still stored in the master data extension from the last time the data was available. So it's a bit more stable if you build a solution for it. And finally, it's not real time. As I mentioned, you have the lag on the synchronization, you have lag on the Automation Studio. So it's not as quick as Salesforce data entry. Next option, the third one and the last one for the Salesforce data, is going through the API. Of course, then you will need to build custom REST API calls in the Salesforce CRM. You can target API entry event to make it as an alternative to the Salesforce data entry or data extension entry. You can target wait until event to decide that, okay, some event in the CRM through the API is allowing people in your journey to go forward from the wait step. You can also target just a data extension so that you can leverage this information for decision splits or goals, exits, personalization lookups, etc. You can decide when the trigger happens. You are not limited to just after update as in the Salesforce data entry. You can decide what will be the actual moment for when you're making the REST API call. And you can make a custom payload driven by any logic. You can leverage any relationships within the CRM. You can leverage even SQL within your code on the CRM side to get this information into your payload, change this payload if you need, transform it, even make additional API calls to get some additional data and have the final prepared perfect journey data going straight to the journey builder. What are the pros? You have nearly unlimited flexibility of what is the trigger, what is the payload, what is the target. So this is really, really nice. And you have the bulk API that is good for the big volumes because, spoiler alert, but using the Salesforce data entry is really, really not good for big volumes. There are a lot of limits that I'll be talking in a moment. So if you want to go with bigger numbers, either from CRM to the Marketing Cloud or the other way, you want to use the bulk API. So API is, of course, the right choice here. But there are also, of course, cons. It is much more technical. You will need the developers. It will be eating up API calls limit, which is much higher than the automation executions limits, but it still is there, and you need to take into consideration depending on the numbers that you are thinking of. And there is yet another option that is not related to the entry, but also allows you to leverage Salesforce data within the journey builder and can circumvent some of the issues that are coming from the API that we were just discussing. And this is the AMScript functions. There are actually 3 core AMScript functions that are related to working with the Salesforce CRM data. This is the create Salesforce object that allows you to create from AMScript. So it can be email, it can be SMS, it can be cloud page, or if you are creative enough, even the automations to the script activity. But also, especially within the journey builder, create standard and custom objects. And what is interesting is it returns the created object ID, so you can then leverage it to go forward with the next steps of your process. There is update single Salesforce object that triggers a record locking. I'll be talking about this a bit more later on, but generally, you might not always want to leverage this function for some objects. And it returns update status, so whether it was successful or not update. And finally, you have the retrieve Salesforce objects, which allows you to get up to 1,000 rows as of winter 2025. Before it was higher limit, but now we have just up to 1,000 rows that we can pull. There are, however, quite a lot of considerations when we are talking about those functions. One thing is that there is no license impact, meaning that those functions, despite being API calls, are not counted against your license limits because they are part of the Marketing Cloud Connect. Another thing is that there is significant performance impact when you are using those functions. They are absolutely great if you are talking about small volumes, about triggered emails, about special event-driven emails, but it's not something that you should be using for big volumes. Here is an interesting excerpt from Elliot Harper that made some tests some time ago. And wanted to make a single function call in an email to retrieve record data from the Sales Cloud at the send time within the email. And he calculated that when he would send it to 2.5 million contacts, the send would take 1.5 years to complete. So you absolutely do not want to use it for bulk volume sends, but rather just for triggered sends and reactive communication. The cool thing is that the AMP script functions support objects that are not synchronized through the Marketing Connect. So again, you can leverage any standard custom object within the CRM. They can leverage the data bindings that we were talking previously. So you can use them within the AMP script functions to get even more interactive process between Salesforce CRM and the Journey Builder. And let me see. Oh, here. They can access even special objects. And here, very interesting part is that if on the Salesforce CRM side, you are using the field history tracking, with AMP script functions, you will be able to look up information in this history on objects. And that's why it's also very interesting, because when we were mentioning that with the Salesforce data entry, we are not getting the data that was removed during the update. With AMP script functions, you can get back this information from before the update and leverage it in the personalization within your emails. Okay, so now let's jump into the Salesforce activities. So this out-of-the-box part that allows you to move data from Journey Builder back to the CRM. So as you could see earlier, we have 9 of those. And as I mentioned earlier, the object activity is the king because it can do everything that the other 8 can do. They can create or update standard and custom objects in Salesforce CRM. They can update the record from the journey or even look up a specific related record. So this is important because, of course, you can, for example, say that I want to create task for the record that is going through the journey. But also you can, for example, create a specific lookup configuration that will try to find, for example, the newest or the last modified opportunity for a given account and make an update there. So it's quite flexible in terms of what you can do with the updates. It can push static and dynamic data. And that means that in terms of the static, you can just like write down what needs to be the value that you are updating, or you can select from a pick list what should be the new value of, for example, status. But you can also leverage the journey data and contact data information to push it to the Salesforce CRM so that it will be different for every single record going through this activity. And the really, really interesting part is that those activities also return the object ID that was created or updated. And this will be really, really interesting. I will say in a moment why. Another important thing is that they are asynchronous. So they will be queued when the contact is going through the activity. But if a lot of records is triggering the activity, the queue can get quite big, and it won't be real time, but rather will be resolving one after another as soon as there is capacity on the Salesforce CRM side. The super important part is also that this is subject to the Apex governor limit. So don't go overboard with using it. It's not a good idea to use Salesforce activities as a bulk updating solution. If you have huge volumes of data that you need to update in the Salesforce CRM, Automation Studio with script activity and bulk API is the right choice. But again, for small reactive changes, this can be a really, really nice solution. Recommendations around this part are whenever you're using Salesforce activities, be sure that you are using the Salesforce CRM IDs as contact keys for the journey. so the contact ID or lead ID, because if you are using, for example, email, and then you are triggering the Salesforce activities, it can create issues with the data in the Salesforce CRM. Pass only fields that require update. So it can be like easy to say, okay, I will update all the fields that I have knowledge about in the Journey Builder, but actually probably not all needs the update. If the field already has the correct value, be sure you are selecting only the values or the fields that actually need the change to make the payload as much as possible and the update as fast as possible. Again, avoid high volume updates on objects, and not only because, again, Apex governor limits, but also about the record locking that I was mentioning earlier, meaning that if you are making an update on a record that has a lot of relationships, it can get locked and it can impact other updates happening, and of course impact the performance. So again, it should be used sparsely for specific small changes, not for like doing huge swatches of changes across multiple objects. And don't use it for bulk updates. There is an API for that. I mentioned that you can get the object ID of the created or updated record. And the approach to this is actually the same as for the Salesforce data entry bindings. After you create an object activity or any other activity, you can create yet another one. And then within the journey data on the map field step, you will see that you have not only the entry, which is the Salesforce data entry, but also you will see this activity that you created earlier. And you will be able to pick the Salesforce object ID and get the personalization string for it. And this is, of course, really, really interesting because this means that you can leverage it into, for example, contact update and push this information down to the data extension, or you can leverage it into a different Salesforce activity and get something updated or created with the information of this new record that you created. Or you can just use it for the personalization in the emails by using this value for the lookups that, okay, you already created this record. I can get the data from this created record and leverage it for the information in the email. I also mentioned earlier that there are these 9 activities, but object activity can do everything else. So probably the easy question is, okay, then should I use only the object activity? I would say not really. Using the other activities is really good because they have specific names and images, and it will make it much easier to see on your journey what is happening, what actually you are doing with the Salesforce activity. So if you can, I would rather go with this specific 8 activities like the task, contact, lead, or case. But for all the other object activities, absolutely perfect. And just describe and document, of course, what you are doing with this object activity. Okay, time for a sum up regarding the Salesforce data in the Journey Builder. With various options, you can have full range coming from the real-time drag and drop solution to a completely flexible custom code solution, from low volume to bulk API options, depending on what you choose. So always be sure to know what are exact requirements for your use case and pick the right tool for the job, because the reason why there are so much different options to use the Salesforce data is because each of them has their own pros and cons. Another thing, you can go bidirectional, so not only pull the data from the Salesforce CRM, but also move it back to the CRM from Journey Builder using either AMP script or Salesforce activities, or of course, direct API to Salesforce. You can think of this option as a workaround for newly enforced SFMC license limits, but be sure to use it only for the use cases that allow you to do it. Again, if you have big bulk volume sends, don't use Salesforce data entry, but for all the small reactive changes, it might be much better idea to use Salesforce data entry rather than use Automation Studio to segment frequently small quick updates on the records. So if your use case all the use of the Salesforce data entry, it can be really nice solution to minimize the impact on the yearly automation execution limit. Always make sure that you are selecting the right tool for the job in terms of the volume. I'm stressing it quite a lot, but actually it's the biggest caveat of the Salesforce data, that the volume can impact a lot what you can and should do in terms of the solution. And then just as a reminder, these solutions can be quite fragile and hard to test. So don't get discouraged. They are worth it, but they just require a bit more attention to make sure they are working correctly. Now it's time for, let me see, additional resources. So there's thankfully quite a lot of resources that you can also get around all those details. Cam Roberts has a great session on the Salesforce data entry that you can watch. Tim Zitter has a great article covering the creation of the Salesforce data entry step by step with the screenshots of the tool. So it's great to see what exactly you need to do to configure your Salesforce data entry. In terms of the journey activities, again, Cam Roberts has a very long session where he's playing with the activities and creating whole journey around them to showcase not only how to configure them, but also what is the whole use case around it. And again, Tim Zitter has yet another article covering how you can work with bulk data with Journey Builder. So that's also definitely worth it if you want to play a bit more with the going back with the data to the CRM. In terms of the data bindings, Rafał Wolsztyniak has a great article on how to use them and what they can do. But again, he will also have a session down the line covering those topics. So be sure to subscribe. And of course, there is also the informations from the current sessions. So there is this bootcamp of fundamentals and hands-on going on. I here put the links to the recordings on the YouTube, but of course, there is quite a lot of sessions still in the future. So be sure to subscribe and watch and learn more from other people in the community. That's all in terms of my material. So I will be checking now the chat for the questions. I saw that JB was answering in the meantime, so thank you very much.
I'm starting from the bottom up, Matthias. And
Yep.
Firstly, this is very invaluable and very insightful session. Really, thank you. I can understand how much of effort you have put in to get all the concepts together and sum it up. Thank you very much, Matthias. And also everyone, I'm sure this is based on a lot of research and his Matthew's experience. So this is a must watch at the session if you want to learn the best practices, all the nuances of the journey builder. And I'm looking at the chat comments, Matthews. Tim has posted. You mentioned in the synchronized data extensions that you can control the data designer relationship between objects. Any recommendations on how to validate that relationship or path?
Yeah, so this is easy to validate because what you can do is just go to the contact builder, data designer, and check the synchronous data extensions configuration. And then you will be able to see, okay, what is the order of the objects and how the objects are connected to each other. So this is the easy part. The hard part is that you won't be able to do anything about it. So it's just, if it is wrong, you have the knowledge it is wrong. And the only thing that you can do is actually to create yet another attribute group and configure it custom in a custom way correctly for your needs, because this out of the box automatically created one is as it is. Official answer is that if you don't like it, reconnect and build it from scratch, maybe one time it will work. This is the answer that I got from the support. So yeah, probably you will want to create your own attribute group to match your needs.
I see a follow-up question to that or a comment on that it requires extensive knowledge and understanding of the CRM data model to be able to verify, right?
I wouldn't say very extensive, but as I mentioned in the early of the slides, yes, the CRM object knowledge generally is useful. The easy way to double check it if you have limited knowledge is that either within Salesforce CRM, you can go to the setup object manager and there see what are the actual relationships within the CRM. If you don't have the access to this place, if you search in Google or on Salesforce documentation for things like Sales Cloud data model, you will also see the references to how it is supposed to work, and you can compare it, like what are the relationships between the objects versus what you have in the data designer. But just the key thing is that it will never be fully correct, because again, the data designer doesn't allow for such complex relationships as the CRM data model. So indeed, the key thing is that you need to understand, for example, what will be the issues if your contact and the case of this contact is connected through the user in the middle, user being the user of the Salesforce CRM rather than your customer, your client. So it does indeed leverages a lot the knowledge that you can have about what are the specific objects within the Salesforce data model.
That's a great answer. Thanks, Matthias. And another question is related to the importing of data or the syncing of data between Salesforce and the Marketing Cloud. So one way is to import the reports and the other way is to do the synchronized data extension. So would you mind to cover the pros and cons of each approach?
Mm-hmm. I honestly haven't been using reports a lot. For sure, the thing with the reports is that it puts a bit more focus on the CRM people. So either you need to be able to work with the reports, or you need to have a support of your CRM team to be able to build segments. Whereas with the synchronized extensions, it's much easier to do whatever you need directly in the Marketing Cloud with your powers. So I would say the key thing here is where the segmentation, selection of the data and the right people for the audience should happen and who has the right knowledge to pick the right people.
And to add just a few things to that, so every contact or the person account or the user that is imported into the Marketing Cloud will be counted towards the billable contacts. So if we are limiting the contacts in the Salesforce CRM itself and then importing only the few records, we can have a check on those records. If we are synchronizing and then filtering out, then we will be having more billable contacts. That's one thing that I observed. And another question, Matthias, when we have the opt-out field in the Salesforce, records with opt-out should enter the sync DE, but not in Journey. I think this question was relevant to the context when you were discussing that specific topic. It was at the very first.
Yeah, so in terms of the synchronized data extensions, generally the sync DEs are getting all the records that you configure. So that they should be should come to the Marketing Cloud. So unless you select that you want to accept only those records that have this opt-out checked, there is such option. By standard, everything, regardless of the opt-out, will get into the synchronized extensions.
You. One question. I think this is the last question. What would you use to trigger SMS messages to leads who have scheduled an appointment, like a doctor's appointment? I want to send a text message immediately after the schedule an appointment and one day before as a reminder.
Yeah. So the easy answer is there's no easy answer. The easy answer would be Salesforce data entry, because it would allow you to select those people and in real time push them to Journey on these scheduled stages of the service appointment, for example, or doctor appointment rather in this case. But as I mentioned before, there is this gotcha, I would say even probably a bug, but generally the limitation that the record needs to have the valid email address, which means that if you want to trigger SMS and this record doesn't have the email address, you don't know it, Salesforce data entry will not work. So I would say the question to you is whether your records will have the email address. If yes, I would use Salesforce data entry. If the email address could be null or can fail the list detective, I would probably go with the API entry if it needs to be real time. If it doesn't need to be real time and it can be like within, let's say, an hour, synchronize data extensions and Automation Studio to push it into the data extension to not use the API for bigger amounts of records.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Maggie, if you have more specific questions on the mobile use cases, we have a session dedicated to that. So that will be covered on October 8th. And I don't see any other questions, Matthews. This is really wonderful session. Really thank you for your time and sharing all your insights.
Awesome. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again tomorrow, 8 a.m. Eastern. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.